The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning. Clara Weston read it 3 times before she allowed herself to understand what it meant. It was not a long letter. The most consequential things rarely are. Written on ivory paper, sealed with dark wax and stamped with the initials E.H.V, letters that half of New York recognized without needing to see the man's face. It contained exactly 47 words. Clara counted them. She counted them because she needed something to hold on to, some fragment of order inside a moment that felt like the floor giving way beneath her feet. Miss Weston, your father's debt to Harlan Voss Industries stands at $112,000. Repayment is due in full by the 14th of October. In the absence of payment, all assets, including the Weston family estate at Cherrywood, will be transferred immediately. There is, however, an alternative. I suggest we meet. She folded the letter along its original crease and set it on the windowsill of her father's study. The study smelled like old tobacco and slow ruin. Papers stacked in unstable towers. Ledgers with numbers that told stories no one in this family wanted to read aloud. A portrait of her grandfather, Edmund Weston, hung above the fireplace, a man who had built a respectable name in the textile trade, who had worn his dignity like armor, who had died before watching everything quietly fall apart. Clara was 24 years old. She had no husband, no inheritance, no allies with real influence. What she had was a mind that worked faster than most people expected, a name that still carried a thin veneer of social respectability, and a secret she had been protecting for the better part of 2 years. A secret she understood even then was the most dangerous thing she owned. Her father was in the parlor. He did not ask about the letter. He had not asked about anything important in months. Arthur Weston sat in his armchair like a man waiting for a verdict he already knew, his hands folded in his lap, his eyes fixed on something no one else in the room could see. The industry had broken him slowly, the way water breaks stone, not in a single dramatic moment, but through years of compounding pressure, of bad partnerships and worse timing, of trusting men who smiled while they maneuvered. "He wants to meet," Clara said. Her father said nothing. "Papa, I heard you." A pause. "What kind of meeting?" "The letter doesn't say. But men like Elias Harlan Voss don't write letters unless the meeting is already decided." Arthur Weston turned to look at his daughter for the first time in what felt like days. His eyes were tired in a way that sleep could not fix. "You don't have to go." Clara looked at him steadily. "Yes," she said. "I do." The offices of Harlan Voss Industries occupied the top 3 floors of a building on 5th Avenue that was designed to communicate one thing above all others: permanence. The stone facade was gray and immovable. The lobby floor was marble, polished to a severity that made footsteps echo like announcements. A man in a dark uniform took Clara's card without expression and disappeared. She waited in a chair upholstered in deep green leather, her hands folded in her lap, her back straight. She had dressed carefully, not expensively, and she no longer had the resources for that, but with precision. Every choice deliberate. She was not here to perform wealth she didn't have. She was here to perform composure she could barely sustain. When they brought her up, it was in an elevator operated by a boy who could not have been older than 16. He did not speak. The floors passed in silence. Elias Harlan Voss was standing at the window when she entered. He did not turn immediately. He finished what he was reading, a document of some kind held loosely in one hand, and then he turned, and he looked at her with eyes the color of January, pale, clear, utterly without warmth. He was taller than she had imagined. Photographs did not capture the quality of his presence, which was less like charisma and more like gravity. You did not feel drawn to him so much as you felt the room rearranging itself around him without asking permission. He was 41 years old, though he looked both older and younger than that, depending on the angle of the light. His face was angular, composed, giving nothing away. His suit was dark. His office was vast. Every surface was ordered with a discipline that suggested not cleanliness but control. "Miss Weston," he said. His voice was low and even, the kind of voice that never rises because it has never needed to. "Sit down." She sat. He did not. He moved to the edge of his desk and stood there, one hand resting on the polished wood, watching her with an expression she could not read. She had expected condescension. What she found instead was something more unsettling: assessment. He was measuring something. She did not yet know what. "Your father owes me a considerable sum," he said. "I'm aware. He cannot repay it." "Also aware." A slight pause. Not quite a reaction, but close. "You are direct." "I was not brought up to waste a man's time," Clara said. "Or my own." Voss looked at her for a long moment. Then he moved behind his desk and sat, and the dynamic of the room shifted subtly. She was now fully across from him, which was better in some ways and worse in others. "I have a proposition," he said. He opened a drawer and placed a document on the desk between them. "I want you to read this before I explain it." Clara looked at the document. It was several pages, dense with legal language, precisely typed. At the top, in plain letters, agreement of marriage, terms and conditions. She did not flinch. She was proud of that. She read. Voss watched. The office was quiet except for the distant sound of the city below. Carriages, voices, the mechanical groan of an industrial world still learning how large it was becoming. The terms were clear, and in their coldness, almost elegant. A legal marriage. A period of no less than 2 years, during which Clara would serve as his wife in all social and public capacities. In exchange, her father's debt, cancelled entirely. The Cherrywood estate, transferred back to Arthur Weston in full. A monthly allowance sufficient for the household. At the end of the 2-year period, either party might dissolve the arrangement under agreed conditions. There was no mention of love. There was no mention of intimacy. There was in the document's final clause a single line that made Clara stop. The wife agrees to disclose upon request any financial or legal information in her personal possession that may bear relevance to Harlan Voss Industries. She read that line twice. Then she looked up. "Why me?" she asked. Voss leaned back slightly. "Because you are respectable enough to satisfy certain social expectations. Because your family name, however diminished, carries no active scandal. And because you are clearly intelligent enough to honor an agreement without requiring it to be explained repeatedly. Those are your reasons." "Yes, not because you find me attractive." Something moved across his face, so small she nearly missed it. "That is not a relevant consideration," he said. "Then I have a question about the final clause." He waited. "The disclosure requirement. It is open-ended. Any financial or legal information. That is a very broad standard." "It is. Why?" "Because I require complete transparency from anyone in my household." Clara set the document down on the edge of his desk. She looked at him directly. "Mr. Voss, I want to be honest with you, because I suspect you respect honesty more than most men you deal with." He said nothing, which she took as an invitation to continue. "I will read this document in full. I will consider your proposition seriously, because I understand what is at stake for my family. But I will not sign anything today, and I will not sign anything that gives you unlimited access to information you have not specified and a purpose you have not named." The silence that followed was long. Voss studied her. Then he said, "You may take the document. Return on Friday with your answer." Clara stood. She picked up the contract, folded it once, and placed it in her bag. She moved toward the door. "Miss Weston." She turned. "Come prepared to sign," he said. "Not because I am threatening you, because when you think it through, you will understand there is no other viable path, and you are too intelligent to pretend otherwise." She left without answering. On the street below, the city moved around her with indifferent speed. Men in dark coats, women with umbrellas, a horse-drawn cart carrying iron beams down the avenue. Clara walked 3 blocks before she stopped, placed one hand against a brick wall, and breathed. The document was in her bag. The secret was still for now hers. But she already knew, with a clarity that felt like ice at the base of her throat, that Friday was not a question. Friday was already decided. He had been right about that, and she hated him precisely the amount she feared she would. She would sign the contract. She would enter the life he had arranged with the precision of a business acquisition, and she would carry, buried somewhere in the logic of it, the thing she could not yet afford to tell him. Because if Elias Harlan Voss ever found out what she knew about his company, about the documents she had seen, about the man who had handed them to her and then disappeared, it would not only be her father's estate at risk, it would be his empire, and she had not yet decided what she was going to do about that. On Friday morning, Clara Weston arrived at 9 o'clock sharp. She sat down across from Elias Harlan Voss. She uncapped her pen, and she signed her name to a life she had not chosen, with her hand perfectly steady and her eyes perfectly clear. The wedding took place on a Wednesday afternoon in late October. There were 43 guests. Clara counted them during the ceremony because it gave her something to do other than feel the weight of what she was agreeing to. 43 people who understood, without needing to be told, that this was not a love match, that it was something else entirely, something more familiar to their world, an arrangement, a merger of diminished respectability and concentrated power. the kind of transaction that happened often enough in their circles that no one felt the need to pretend surprise. The ceremony itself lasted 17 minutes. The minister was a man named Reverend Ashford, who had officiated at enough society weddings that his voice carried the smooth neutrality of someone performing a script he no longer thought about. Clara wore a dress of ivory silk that had belonged to her mother. It fit well enough. Elias Harlan Voss wore a dark suit that looked exactly like every other suit he owned. He did not smile. He spoke his vows in the same tone he used to conduct business, clear, measured, without inflection. When the minister said, "You may kiss the bride," Voss leaned forward and pressed his lips to Clara's forehead, not her mouth, her forehead. A gesture that communicated precisely what it needed to. Acknowledgement without intimacy. Respect without desire. Clara felt the eyes of every guest on her. She kept her expression composed. She had learned, in the last 2 weeks, that composure was the only currency she had left. The reception was held at the Voss estate on the northern edge of the city, a sprawling property surrounded by iron gates and carefully maintained grounds that looked less like a home and more like a fortress designed to appear civilized. The house itself was Georgian in style, built from pale stone with tall windows that reflected the sky without letting you see inside. Everything about it was designed to communicate the same message: permanence, order, control. Clara had been inside the house only once before, briefly, when Voss had shown her the rooms that would be hers. He had not used the word ours. He had been specific. "These rooms are yours. You may arrange them as you see fit. I will not enter without your permission." She had not known then whether that was courtesy or indifference. She still did not know. The reception moved with the practiced rhythm of an event that had been planned not for joy, but for efficiency. Champagne was poured. Toasts were made. Her father stood and said something about gratitude and new beginnings, and Clara watched his hands shake as he held the glass. No one else seemed to notice, or if they did, they had the grace not to mention it. Voss did not toast. He stood near the fireplace with a glass he did not drink from, speaking occasionally to men who approached him with the careful deference of people who understood where power lived. He did not look at Clara often, but when he did, his gaze was steady and unreadable, and she felt it like a hand on her shoulder, not violent, but absolute. By 6 o'clock, the last of the guests had left. The house fell into silence. Clara stood in the front hall, still in her wedding dress, and for the first time that day, she allowed herself to feel the full enormity of what she had done. She had signed away 2 years of her life. She had agreed to live in the home of a man she did not know, under terms she could not fully predict, carrying a secret that could destroy him if it ever came to light, and she had done it all with her hand perfectly steady. Voss appeared at the top of the stairs. He had removed his jacket. His shirt was still buttoned to the collar. He looked at her for a moment, then said, "You should rest. Dinner will be at 8. Clara nodded. She did not trust her voice yet. He turned and disappeared down the hall. The first week passed like something underwater. Everything felt slower, heavier, muffled. Clara moved through the house with the careful deliberation of someone learning the rules of a place that had not been designed with her in mind. The staff, a housekeeper named Mrs. Calloway, a cook, 2 maids, and a man who managed the grounds, treated her with polite formality. They called her Mrs. Voss. It sounded wrong every time, like a name that belonged to someone else. Voss kept to a schedule so precise it could have been printed in a ledger. He woke at 5:30. He left for his offices by 7. He returned, without variation, at 6:45. Dinner was served at 8. He ate methodically without speaking unless she initiated conversation, which she did less and less as the days went on. After dinner, he retired to his study. She did not see him again until the following evening. On the 9th day, Clara asked Mrs. Calloway if Mr. Voss always maintained this routine. Mrs. Calloway, a woman in her late 50s with silver hair pulled into a tight bun, looked at Clara with something close to sympathy. "He has kept the same schedule for 12 years, Mrs. Voss. Since before I came to work here. Does he ever vary it? Only when business requires travel, but those occasions are rare." Clara absorbed this. "And when he is here, does he ever spend time in other parts of the house? The library, perhaps, the sitting room?" Mrs. Calloway hesitated. "Mr. Voss does not use those rooms, ma'am. He works, he eats, he sleeps. That is the extent of it." "I see. If I may say so," Mrs. Calloway added, her voice lowering slightly, "you are the first real change this house has seen in a very long time. It will take him some adjusting." Clara did not ask what Mrs. Calloway meant by that. She was not certain she wanted to know. On the 14th day, Clara made a decision. She could not live like this. Not for 2 years. Not in a house where silence was the primary language and distance the only safety. If this arrangement was going to survive, if she was going to survive it, then something had to shift. That evening, when Voss returned at 6:45, Clara was waiting in the front hall. She had changed into a dress of deep blue wool. She had put her hair up. She looked, she hoped, like someone who had made a deliberate choice to be present. Voss stopped when he saw her. "Is something wrong?" "No," Clara said. "I thought I might join you in your study this evening, if you have no objection." He looked at her for a long moment. "For what purpose?" "Conversation. About whatever you prefer. Your work, the state of the railroads, the weather, anything that is not silence." Voss set his briefcase down. He studied her with that same assessing gaze she had seen in his office the first day they met. Then he said, "Very well. After dinner." The study was a large room on the second floor, lined floor to ceiling with shelves. Most of them held books, though some contained ledgers, files, carefully labeled boxes. A desk dominated the center of the room. Wide, dark wood covered with papers arranged in neat stacks. There was a fire burning in the fireplace. 2 chairs sat angled toward it. Voss gestured to one of the chairs. "Sit." Clara sat. He took the chair opposite. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Voss said, "You are finding the arrangement difficult." It was not a question. "I am finding it isolating," Clara said carefully, "which I expected to some degree, but I did not expect to feel like a guest in a house I am supposed to call home." "You are not a guest. Then what am I?" He considered this. "You are my wife, in the legal and social sense of the term. That entitles you to certain considerations: respect, security, access to the household resources. But not your time. My time is spent building and maintaining an enterprise that employs 4,000 people. That is not negotiable. I am not asking you to negotiate it. I am asking you to acknowledge that a marriage, even one built on a contract, requires some degree of shared existence. Otherwise, we are simply 2 people living in the same building, and that will not satisfy the social expectations you mentioned when you proposed this arrangement." Voss leaned back slightly. The firelight caught the sharp angles of his face. "What are you proposing?" "Dinner together, not in silence, conversation, even if it is brief." "About what?" "Your work, if you prefer. I am not unintelligent. I can follow the subject." He studied her. "You read financial reports?" "When I have access to them, yes." "Why?" "Because I like to understand how the world functions, and money is how the world functions." Something shifted in his expression. Not warmth exactly, but interest. The faintest suggestion that he was reconsidering an earlier assessment. "Very well," he said. "We will speak at dinner. But I will not alter my schedule beyond that. I am not asking you to." He nodded once. Then he stood, moved to his desk, and returned with a folder. He handed it to her. "This is a summary of the rail expansion project we are pursuing in the Western Territories. Read it. If you have questions tomorrow, I will answer them." Clara took the folder. "Thank you." "Do not thank me. If you are going to participate in this household, you should understand what sustains it." He said it without cruelty, but also without gentleness. It was a statement of fact, delivered in the same tone he might use to explain a contract clause. Clara left the study with the folder in her hands, and a feeling she could not quite name settling in her chest. It was not hope. Hope felt too fragile for what this was, but it was something, a small opening. A suggestion that the man who had built an empire on ruthless precision might, under very specific conditions, allow the smallest margin for something other than control. The dinners changed after that, not dramatically. Voss did not suddenly become warm or expansive, but he began to speak. He explained the rail project, the routes, the financing structures, the political maneuvering required to secure land rights. Clara listened. She asked questions. He answered them, and occasionally, when she made a point he had not considered, he paused, just for a second, but it was enough. On the 23rd day, he asked her a question. They were halfway through dinner when he set down his fork and said, "Your father worked in textiles." "Yes." "Why did the business fail?" Clara hesitated. It was a question she had not expected. "Poor partnerships. Bad debt. He trusted men who were better at appearing successful than actually being successful. And you were aware of this?" "Toward the end, yes." "Did you advise him?" "I tried. He did not listen. He thought I was being anxious, overly cautious. He said I did not understand how business was conducted among men. Voss looked at her directly. He was wrong. It was the first compliment he had ever given her, if it could even be called that. It was more like an acknowledgement, a recognition of competence, but coming from him, it felt significant. "Thank you," Clara said quietly. He returned to his meal, but she noticed, and she was certain he meant for her to notice, that he had asked the question at all. On the 31st day, something broke. Clara was in the library, reading, when she heard raised voices from the front hall. She stood and moved to the doorway. Voss was standing near the entrance, speaking to a man she did not recognize. The man was younger, perhaps 30, dressed well but with a tightness around his eyes that suggested desperation poorly concealed. "I have already given you my answer," Voss said, his voice cold and flat. "You are making a mistake," the man said. "If you refuse this deal, you will lose more than you realize. I do not make mistakes. I make calculations, and you are not part of them." The man's face flushed. "You think you are untouchable, but you are not. There are people who know things that could—" Voss stepped forward, not quickly, but with enough intent that the man stopped speaking immediately. "You will leave my home now, and if you return or if you contact me again, I will ensure that every door in this city closes to you, permanently." The man stared at him. Then he turned and left. The door closed. Voss stood very still for a moment. Then he turned and saw Clara standing in the doorway. Their eyes met. She saw something in his face she had never seen before. Not anger, not quite, but something close to it, something barely controlled. "How much did you hear?" he said. "Enough to know that man was threatening you." Voss said nothing. Clara took a step forward. "Who was he?" "No one of consequence. He mentioned people who know things." "What things?" Voss looked at her for a long moment. Then he said very quietly, "That is not your concern. I am your wife. You are party to a contract. That does not entitle you to access I have not granted." Clara felt something sharp and cold settle in her stomach. She nodded once. "Of course. Forgive me." She turned to leave. "Clara." She stopped. It was the first time he had used her given name. "There are aspects of my business that are complicated," he said. "It is better for you if you do not involve yourself in them, because you do not trust me, because I do not trust anyone." She looked at him, and for the first time she saw something underneath the control. Not vulnerability exactly, but a kind of exhaustion, the weariness of a man who had spent so long building walls that he no longer remembered what it felt like to stand without them. "Very well," Clara said softly. She went upstairs. But as she lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, she thought about the man's words, about threats and knowledge and things people knew, and she thought about the documents she had hidden in the false bottom of her trunk, documents that carried the name Harlan Voss Industries, documents that outlined transactions that should not exist, documents that, if made public, would not just damage his reputation, they would end him. On the 32nd day, Clara woke with a decision already made. She would tell him nothing. Not yet. Not until she understood whether the man she had married was someone who could be trusted, or someone who would destroy her the moment she became a liability. Winter came early that year. By mid-November, the city was wrapped in cold that felt deliberate, as though the season itself had made a choice to arrive with force. Snow fell in heavy silence. The streets turned grey and white. Inside the Voss estate, fires burned in every room, but Clara still felt cold in a way that had nothing to do with temperature. She had been married for 6 weeks. In that time, she had learned to read the small signs that indicated Elias Harlan Voss's state of mind, the way he held his jaw when something displeased him, the slight narrowing of his eyes when he was calculating risk, the particular quality of silence that meant he was deciding whether or not to trust what someone had just told him. She had also learned that he was being watched, not by her, by others. Men appeared at the house with increasing frequency. They arrived unannounced, always in the evening, always asking to speak with Voss privately. He received them in his study with the door closed. Sometimes the meetings lasted 10 minutes, sometimes an hour. Clara never asked what they discussed. She had learned after the incident with the man who had threatened him that Voss did not respond well to questions about his business, particularly from her. But she listened, not intentionally at first, but the house was large and quiet, and sound traveled in unexpected ways. She learned that if she sat in the small reading alcove at the end of the second-floor hallway, she could hear voices from the study below. Not clearly, not every word, but enough. Enough to know that something was wrong. On the 47th day of their marriage, Clara heard a name that made her blood stop. She was in the alcove reading by lamplight when the study door opened below and two men entered with Voss. She recognized one of them, a lawyer named Osborne who had attended the wedding. The other was unfamiliar, older, with a voice that carried authority. "The audit will begin next month," the unfamiliar man said. "You need to be prepared for that." "I am always prepared," Voss replied. "This is different. They are not looking at your current operations. They are looking at acquisitions made between 1892 and 1895. Specifically, the purchases involving the Northern Union Line." Clara's hand tightened on her book. The Northern Union Line. She knew that name. It was written on every document, hidden in the false bottom of her trunk. "Let them look," Voss said, his voice cold. "Everything was conducted legally." "Legally, yes," Osborne said carefully, "but there are questions about how certain stock transfers were arranged, about who benefited, about whether full disclosure was made to shareholders at the time. Those questions have already been answered. Not to everyone's satisfaction," the older man said, "particularly not to Senator Whitmore's satisfaction. He is pushing for a formal investigation." There was a long pause. Then Voss said very quietly, "Whitmore is being paid to push." "By whom?" "That is what I intend to find out." The conversation continued, but Clara no longer heard it. Her pulse was too loud in her ears. She stood, carefully, and returned to her room. She closed the door. She locked it. Then she went to the trunk at the foot of her bed, opened it, and retrieved the envelope she had been carrying since before the wedding. Inside were 12 pages, contracts, stock certificates, correspondence between Elias Harlan Voss and a man named Peter Dunmore, who had served as a broker during the Northern Union acquisition. The documents outlined a series of transactions that, on the surface, appeared legitimate, but Clara had read them enough times to see the pattern underneath. Stock had been transferred at prices far below market value. Shares had been sold to shell companies that did not, as far as she could tell, actually exist. And the man who had orchestrated the entire arrangement, Peter Dunmore, had disappeared 8 months ago. No one knew where he had gone. But Clara knew why. Because Peter Dunmore had been her father's business partner, and before he disappeared, he had given these documents to Arthur Weston with a single instruction: keep them safe. If anything happens to me, make sure they reach the right people. Her father, in his confusion and decline, had forgotten about them. Clara had not. She had found them in his study 2 weeks before the wedding. She had read them. She had understood immediately what they meant, and she had made a choice she was no longer certain had been the right one. She had kept them. She had hidden them, and she had said nothing. The next morning, Voss did not come down to breakfast. Mrs. Calloway appeared instead, carrying a note on a silver tray. "Mr. Voss asks that you join him in his study at 10 o'clock. Clara looked up from her tea. "Did he say why?" "No, ma'am." At 10 o'clock, Clara stood outside the study door. She knocked once. "Come in." Voss was seated behind his desk. There were papers spread in front of him, and his expression was darker than she had ever seen it. He did not ask her to sit. "Close the door," he said. She did. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "I need to ask you a question, and I need you to answer it honestly." Clara's heart was beating too fast. She kept her face composed. "Of course. Have you had contact with anyone regarding my business? Anyone at all?" "No." "Are you certain?" "Yes." He leaned back slightly. "I am being investigated. You may have already heard rumors. If you have not, you will. It is important that you understand what that means for this household. For you, I understand. Do you?" He stood and walked to the window. "Because I am not convinced you do. This is not a small matter. If the investigation proceeds, there will be scrutiny of me, of my holdings, of everyone associated with me. That includes you." Clara kept her voice steady. "I have nothing to hide." Voss turned to look at her. His eyes were cold and searching. "Everyone has something to hide, Clara. The question is whether it matters." She did not answer. He studied her for another moment, then returned to his desk. "There will be people who approach you. Journalists, politicians, men who want leverage. You will tell them nothing, is that clear?" "Perfectly clear." "Good." He picked up a pen and returned his attention to the papers in front of him. "You may go." Clara left the study with her hands clenched so tightly her nails left marks in her palms. That night she could not sleep. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the conversation over and over. Everyone has something to hide. He had said it like a fact, like something he had long ago accepted about the world. But what did he know? What did he suspect? And what would he do if he found out that the wife he had acquired for the sake of social respectability was carrying the very documents that could confirm every accusation being leveled against him? At 2 in the morning, Clara made a decision. She got out of bed. She dressed in the dark. She retrieved the envelope from the trunk, folded it carefully, and placed it inside the lining of her coat. Then she went downstairs, moving as quietly as she could, and slipped out through the side entrance. The night was freezing. Snow was falling again, soft and steady. Clara walked 3 blocks before she found a carriage willing to take her. She gave the driver an address on the east side of the city, a place she had not been in years, the law offices of Marcus Hale. Hale had been a friend of her grandfather, an honest man in a profession that did not always reward honesty. If anyone could tell her what to do with the documents, whether to destroy them, hide them, or use them, it was him. The building was dark when she arrived. She knocked anyway. After a long moment, a light appeared in the window above. The door opened. Marcus Hale stood there in a dressing gown, grey-haired and sharp-eyed even at this hour. "Clara Weston," he said. Then he corrected himself. "Clara Voss." "I need your help," she said. He looked at her for a moment. Then he stepped aside. "Come in." She told him everything. The debt, the marriage, the documents, the investigation. Hale listened without interrupting, his hands folded on the desk between them. When she finished, he was silent for a long time. Then he said, "Do you know what you are holding? Evidence of financial misconduct. More than that, you are holding a weapon, and weapons do not stay neutral. If those documents become public, they will destroy Elias Voss completely, his empire, his reputation, everything. I know. Do you also know what will happen to you if he discovers you have them?" Clara looked at him steadily. "Yes." Hale leaned forward. "Then why did you come to me?" "Because I do not know what the right choice is, and I need someone to tell me." "I cannot tell you that, but I can tell you this." He paused. "If you use those documents, you will be safe from him, but you will never be safe from what you have done. If you destroy them, you protect him, but you give up the only leverage you have. And if you keep them hidden, as you have been doing, you live in fear, every day, waiting for the moment when he finds out. So there is no good choice. There rarely is. Not in situations like this." Clara closed her eyes. When she opened them, Hale was watching her with something close to pity. "What would you do?" she asked quietly. "I would ask myself one question," he said. "Do you believe he is guilty of what those documents suggest?" "I do not know." "Then perhaps that is what you need to find out." Clara returned to the estate just before dawn. She entered through the side door, removed her coat, and started toward the stairs. Voss was standing in the hallway. He was still dressed. He had not gone to bed. He looked at her with an expression she could not read, something between suspicion and something else, something harder to name. "Where were you?" he said. Clara's mind moved quickly. "I could not sleep. I went for a walk. In the middle of the night." "Yes." "Alone." "Yes." He stepped closer, not threateningly, but deliberately. "You are lying." Clara's breath caught, but she did not look away. "I needed air. I needed to think. I did not realize I required your permission to leave the house." "You do not, but you do require my trust. And right now, I do not have enough information to give it to you." They stood there facing each other in the dim hallway, and Clara understood that something fundamental had shifted. He was no longer treating her as a wife. He was treating her as a variable, an unknown factor in an equation he was trying to solve. "I have given you no reason to distrust me," she said carefully. "You have given me no reason to trust you either." He turned and walked toward his study. At the door, he stopped. Without looking back, he said, "If you are hiding something, Clara, I will find out. I always do." The door closed. Clara stood alone in the hallway, her coat still in her hands, the envelope still hidden in its lining. And she realized with a cold and terrible clarity that the worst part of this was not the fear. It was the fact that she was beginning to understand him, to see the logic underneath the control, to recognize that he was not cruel. He was careful, and in his world, careful meant ruthless. She went upstairs. She did not sleep, and when morning came, she knew that the choice she had been avoiding could not be avoided much longer. By the 53rd day, the investigation had begun. By the 55th, her name had appeared in the newspapers, and by the 57th, Elias Harlan Voss stopped speaking to her entirely. The newspaper arrived on a Thursday morning. Clara was alone in the breakfast room when Mrs. Calloway brought it in on a tray, her face carefully neutral in a way that communicated everything, Clara unfolded the paper and saw the headline immediately. Voss Empire under federal scrutiny. Senator demands full accounting of Northern Union acquisition. Below it, in smaller print, Mrs. Elias Voss, formerly Clara Weston, daughter of failed textile merchant Arthur Weston, now resident of Fifth Avenue Estate. They had named her. They had connected her to her father's failure, to Voss's wealth, to the investigation. She was no longer invisible. She was evidence of something. Though of what exactly the article did not say, it simply implied. And implication, Clara had learned, was often more damaging than fact. She set the paper down. Voss entered the room moments later. He looked at the newspaper. Then at her. He did not sit. "Pack a bag," he said. Clara looked up. "What? You are leaving? Today? I am sending you to the estate in Connecticut until this is resolved. You are removing me. I am protecting you. From what? From being questioned, from being used as leverage against me, from being destroyed simply because you carry my name." He paused. "This is not a request." Clara stood slowly. "And if I refuse?" "You will not refuse. You do not know that." Voss stepped closer. His voice dropped, controlled but edged with something sharp. "Clara, there are men who will use you to get to me. They will ask questions you cannot answer. They will twist anything you say. You do not understand what you are walking into. Then explain it to me." "No." "Why?" "Because you are safer not knowing." Clara felt something inside her crack. "I'm tired of being told I'm safer in ignorance. I'm tired of being treated like a piece on a board you are moving to protect yourself. If this marriage means anything, if I mean anything beyond a signature on a contract, then tell me the truth." Voss stared at her. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then he said, very quietly, "You want the truth?" "Yes." The Northern Union acquisition was legal. Every document was filed. Every shareholder was informed. But there were transactions that occurred outside the formal record. Payments made to expedite approvals. Deals structured to avoid certain tax obligations. Nothing that violated the letter of the law. But enough to create questions I cannot easily answer. Clara's chest tightened. "So they are right. They are technically correct, which is all that matters in an investigation." "And Peter Dunmore." Voss went very still. "How do you know that name?" Clara realized too late what she had revealed. She tried to recover. "I heard it. During one of your meetings. You were listening." "I was in the house. Sound travels." He stepped closer. His eyes were cold and searching. "What else did you hear?" "Nothing." "Clara, nothing that matters. Everything matters." His voice was low now. Dangerous. "If you know something, if you have heard something, you will tell me. Now." She should have lied. She should have deflected. But something in his tone, in the way he was looking at her, made her understand that the choice she had been avoiding was no longer hers to delay. "I have documents," she said. The silence that followed was absolute. Voss did not move, did not blink. "What documents?" "Contracts. Correspondence between you and Peter Dunmore. Outlining transactions that were never disclosed. Where did you get them?" "Dunmore gave them to my father before he disappeared. My father forgot about them. I found them 2 weeks before our wedding." Voss's expression did not change, but something in the air between them shifted, became colder, more precise. "And you kept them?" "Yes." "You have had them this entire time?" "Yes." "You married me knowing you were carrying evidence that could destroy me." Clara lifted her chin. "Yes." He took a step back, then another. He looked at her as though seeing her for the first time, not as a wife, not as a convenience, but as a threat he had failed to identify. "Where are they now?" he said. "Safe." "That is not an answer." "It is the only answer I am giving you, until I know what you intend to do with them." Voss laughed. It was a short, bitter sound. "You think you have leverage. I know I do. You have nothing. If those documents existed, they would have surfaced already. If Dunmore wanted to use them, he would have. The fact that you are holding them means they are incomplete, circumstantial, insufficient to prove anything on their own, perhaps, but they are sufficient to raise questions. And in an investigation, questions are enough." He stared at her. "Why did you not use them?" "Because I was not certain." "Of what?" "Of whether you deserved to be destroyed." The words hung in the air between them. Voss moved to the window. He stood there, looking out at the snow-covered grounds, his hands behind his back. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter, almost tired. "I built this empire from nothing. I started with a single rail line and $3,000 borrowed from a man who died thinking I would fail. I worked 20-hour days for 15 years. I made decisions other men would not make. I took risks other men would not take. And yes, I made compromises. I structured transactions in ways that benefited me more than they benefited others. I paid men to smooth obstacles that should not have existed in the first place. I did what was necessary, not what was noble. He turned to face her. I am not a good man, Clara. I have never pretended to be. But I am not the villain they are trying to make me. I did not steal. I did not cheat shareholders. I simply understood the system better than they did. And now they want to punish me for that. Clara looked at him, really looked at him, and she saw for the first time not the man who controlled everything, but the man who had spent so long building walls that he had forgotten what it felt like to stand without them. What do you want me to do with the documents? She asked quietly. I want you to give them to me, so you can destroy them, so I can decide what they mean and whether they matter. Clara crossed the room. She stood in front of him, close enough to see the tension in his jaw, the exhaustion in his eyes. If I give them to you, she said, I have nothing, no protection, no leverage, just your word that you will not send me away the moment this is over. You have my word. Why should I believe you? Because I have never lied to you. Not once. I have withheld information. I have refused to answer questions, but I have never lied. Clara studied his face. Then she reached into the pocket of her dress and withdrew a folded envelope. She held it between them. These are copies, she said. The originals are with someone I trust. If anything happens to me, if I disappear, if I am sent away, if I am harmed, they will be made public. Voss took the envelope. He opened it. He read the first page, then the second. His expression did not change, but his hands tightened on the paper. Marcus Hale, he said. Yes, you went to him. I did. Voss looked at her. You are more dangerous than I gave you credit for. I learned from the best. He almost smiled. Almost. Then he folded the documents and placed them on the desk. These prove nothing I have not already admitted, but they will raise questions I do not want to answer. Publicly, then answer them privately, to me. Why? Because if we are going to survive this, if this marriage is going to be anything more than a legal formality, then I need to know who I married. Not the version you show the world, the actual man. Voss was silent for a long time. Then he said, I arranged the transactions to avoid oversight. I used shell companies to hide the flow of capital. I paid Dunmore to facilitate it because he knew how to move money without leaving traces. When the Northern Union Board began asking questions, I bought their silence, not illegally, but completely. Dunmore became a liability when he started keeping records. So I made sure he understood that his continued comfort depended on his continued silence. He disappeared because I gave him enough money to disappear comfortably, and I have been waiting ever since for those documents to surface. Clara absorbed this. So, you knew they existed, I suspected, and you married me anyway. I married you because your father owed me a debt, and you were the most expedient solution. I did not know at the time that you were also the greatest risk. And now I'm deciding whether you are an asset or a threat. Clara looked at him steadily. I am both, just as you are. He studied her. Then he moved to his desk, retrieved a pen, and wrote something on a piece of paper. He handed it to her. It was a deed, transferring the Cherrywood estate to her name, irrevocably. What is this? Clara said. Insurance. If I fall, you will not fall with me. The estate is yours, free and clear. No one can take it from you. Not the government. Not my creditors, not me. Why would you do this? Because you could have destroyed me at any point in the last 2 months, and you did not. That is worth something. Clara looked at the deed, then at him. What happens now? Now you decide. Give Hale the instruction to release the documents, or give him the instruction to destroy them. Either way, the choice is yours. And if I release them, then I will fight, and I will probably lose, but at least I will know who ended me. And if I destroy them, then we survive this together, or we do not, but we do it as partners, not as adversaries. Clara folded the deed carefully. She placed it in her pocket. Then she looked at the man she had married, the man who had built an empire on ruthless calculation and was now offering her the only thing he had left to give, trust. She walked to the door. She stopped. I will send word to Hale this afternoon, she said. Voss did not ask which instructions she would give. He simply nodded. Clara left the room. 3 weeks later, the investigation concluded. The federal auditors found irregularities, but nothing prosecutable. The transactions had been structured carefully enough that they existed in the grey space between legal and illegal. Senator Whitmore made noise. The newspapers wrote editorials, But without concrete evidence, the momentum faded. Elias Harlan Voss remained standing. Diminished, perhaps. Scrutinized, certainly, but standing. Clara Voss remained at his side, not because the contract required it, but because she had made a different choice, a choice that had nothing to do with debt or obligation or survival. She had chosen to burn the documents, not because she believed he was innocent, but because she believed he was capable of something more than the empire he had built, and she wanted to see what that looked like. On a cold morning in March, Voss found her in the library. "The estate is being sold," he said. Clara looked up. "Cherrywood. No, this one. I am liquidating assets, reducing exposure, starting smaller. Where will we live? I do not know yet. But wherever it is, it will not look like this." Clara stood. She walked to where he stood by the window. "Good," she said. He looked at her. "You are not concerned. I married a man who built an empire. I would rather be married to a man who knows when to let it go." For the first time since she had known him, Elias Harlan Voss smiled. Not much, but enough. Outside, the snow was melting, and somewhere in the ruins of what had been, something new was beginning.